Hey, what's going on YouTube? Welcome back. So today I am going to be installing a slight lift on my Tacoma. I decided to go with 2 inches in the front and 1 inch in the rear. I didn't want to go too high, just something to maybe make it look a little better. It's really not going to increase ground clearance. The rear differential is going to stay in the exact same spot, so it's going to have the same amount of clearance, but it's purely for looks. And I didn't want to go with a full 3 inches in the front. 2 inches seemed like it was the right amount, and I don't want to fully level it out. I don't mind the rake, and I cannot stand it when they sag in the rear. I hate the way that looks. It just makes me cringe when I see other Tacomas on the road and it's sagging in the rear. Just, ugh, I hate that look. So, take you over to the bench and show you what we got to install. Alright, so here's what we have to install today. I ordered 3 separate kits. And we'll start from the right, work our way to the left. So right here was all one kit. So they had different options. This is the 2 in the front, 1 in the rear. So we got the 2-inch spacer for the front. We got the spacers, bolts. Some of them have studs. This particular one has bolts that go into it. These are the U-bolts and the spacer blocks. A lot of the reviews said that the U-bolts were excessively long. I think they're just a generic U-bolt to use in all the kits. So you will have to cut some of it off the bottom if you don't want an excessive amount sticking off the bottom. Moving on to the next one. So these guys right here, just right here, these relocate the front sway bar. So it looks like it drops it down and moves it slightly forward to have the clearance. It doesn't change in the function, it just makes it so that it aligns better. And I think with some of the bigger ones, like the 3-inch, the sway bar has a tendency to rub on the springs. So I got this just in case. I think this kit was like $22 or something like that. So I'm like, I'll go ahead and get that as well. Instead of doing it later after it's bugging me and rubbing or anything like that. And then finally, this one is a differential drop kit. It's got bolts and it's got spacers to keep the CV joints in factory alignment and keep them from wearing out. So that's what we have to install today. Hoping that I have everything I need, all the tools I need, and hoping that it goes smoothly. Okay, so obviously I started off by lifting the truck up and getting the tires off from it and out of the way. Once the tires were out of the way, I needed to remove the skid plates. I went ahead and removed both of them. I was going to have to remove the rear one in order to drop the differential down anyway, so I got them both out of the way to start with. Next was removing the sway bar. I removed the whole sway bar because I was doing the relocation kit, so I needed to remove the whole thing anyway. I also had to remove the support brackets so I could get the sway bar out. and then moved on to removing the lower control arm bolts, the bolts that hold it to the spindle, and loosening up the strut. I then loosened the bolts on the inside of the control arm so that it would swing out of the way and I could drop the whole strut out. And then mounting the spacer on top of the strut. It's a lot easier just to do it on the floor with a pry bar so that I could torque those nuts down on top of the spacer. And then lifted it back up in there. Put the bolts in so that it would stay in place. And then swing the lower control arm back into place. Get the bottom bolts back in, get those torqued. And then tighten up the bolts on the inner control arm. It's the same process for both sides. For time's sake, to keep the video from being too long, I'm only showing you one side. So now we're looking at a close-up shot. I am installing the drop kit for the differential. For the spacers and longer bolts. I now had to test fit the skid plates. The rear skid plate has these two little tabs that stick out on it. I had to shorten those, just grind them down a little bit. And then the sway bar goes in. Those aluminum blocks drop it down and move it forward just slightly. So now I can get the sway bar back into the truck. This was a bit interesting because I only had two hands and I kind of felt like I needed more trying to hold the sway bar and the brackets that hold it in place. Once I got the sway bar in and all torqued back up, I can install the front supports. On the driver's side, I ended up having to notch it slightly with the grinder in order to clear the differential, or the differential mounts. It was a small amount that I had to notch out. Now right here, I am assessing the fitment because it doesn't quite fit. So I am showing you a picture up in the corner of the differential drop kit. Comes with the bolts and the spacers, but there's no instructions that come with it, so you had to kind of figure out where everything went. So the big spacers at the very top and the long bolts, that drops the differential down. Then the shorter bolts and the smaller spacers, that's to kind of drop down the skid plate. And since it didn't really tell me where they went, I tried using them on the rear one first, on one side of it. Then found out that that's not the best place to use them, and I needed to use them on the back side of the skid plate in order to clear the lowered differential mounts. Once I got that figured out, I got that all put back together. I turned the truck around in the garage and got to work on the back side. So the back side was considerably easier. I do have to do one extra step probably than most people because I have the Firestone airbags. So I had to unmount those first so that I would be able to get the old U-bolts out and the new U-bolts in. So when I dropped the differential down, it wouldn't actually drop low enough from the spring. So I ended up just using a bottle jack to push the spring back up. But when I lowered it back down, it didn't actually drop on the pin. So I just grabbed a ratchet strap and connected it between the two sets of leaf springs on both sides and just pulled it together. It was just ever so slightly off, so it just needed a tiny little bit of coaxing. And like I said earlier, you can see how much longer the bolts are. So I took a Sawzall and I cut them off. No big deal. Interesting side note, the spacer blocks for the front and the back were actually the same thickness. So when you put it the same thickness in the back, it only gives you 1 inch of lift, but since it's a strut in the front, it gives you 2 inches of lift. So you can see right there, probably you can see the orange from the ratchet strap that I used to pull the springs together. But I mean, I did this in an afternoon all by myself in my garage. So it was a really easy kit to install. So this is the before. And this is after the lift is installed. I'm very happy with it. I feel like it gave just the right amount of lift, but not too much, without increasing the tire size too much. And you can see that the tires don't stick out from the truck, which is the look that I prefer. And we will finish off with some measurements at each wheel of the before and after height. Well, that does it for the lift on my 2017 Tacoma. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more I Can Do It Myself videos.